Some messages arrive like fevered dreams, fractured, clouded, half seen. You might see a sky aflame, filled with dark shapes and pulsing with strange light, or a shimmering city of glass hanging upside down in the void. Maybe it's a rusted crown wreathed in smoke, or the shadow of a smiling girl standing alone in a crumbling library. Or perhaps you'd see torrents of green water spilling and pouring over snow-capped mountains. Hours, days, sometimes weeks of deconstruction, comparison, analysis, and interpretation may be needed to tease the meaning from such messages. Only then, if you're lucky, might you unpick the tangled threads and distill the visions into clarity. Only then might you come to realize that they are in fact announcements or requests, administrative reports, or calls for aid from some far-flung desperate soul or besieged world. Or maybe they are warnings, echoes of fear from a ship lost to the void, or from a crumbling bastion preparing for its final stand against the dark. But then there are messages of a different kind, ones that don't grind against the mind, that don't fill the space behind your eyes with throbbing pain. These are incredibly rare gifts. They flow gently and are clear as glass. Sometimes they take the form of sigils or icons, maps, matrices, or sequences of numbers. Once in a great while, the Holy Emperor, beloved by all, grants this brief mercy, and a full thought or image will crystallize whole within your mind's eye, totally coherent for a precious instant, long enough for you and the choir to understand its meaning, ready to pass it on to the next relay or wherever it needs to go. Yet, there are also many, far too many, that remain indecipherable, beyond even the reach of the most skilled and determined minds. These messages will forever remain mysteries, their meanings twisted and contorted beyond all recognition, warped by unrestrained emotion, a flare of rage, a surge of hope or terror, or eroded by distance, time, or interference. Such broken transmissions do more than strain your collective mind, bringing with them an alien static that shreds understanding and ripples through the minds linked to yours in waves of confusion and pain. But this pain is nothing. There is a deeper, gnawing ache that stems from the realization that no one will ever know the importance of the knowledge these fragments once carried. They are lost, polluted, without anchor or form, stripped of their purpose, scattered as broken puzzles that no sane mind could ever hope to complete. But such is the astropath's burden, your burden, to take these echoes of sense, raw and twisted, and break them down into something usable, readable, meaningful, and to ensure that they are deciphered, transcribed, and transmitted to where they are needed. You and the choir must work tirelessly to process all you can, for you all will understand that within your relay may rest the fate not just of a single soul, but of a city, of a world, or of a system. It's a brutal routine you practice day after day, teasing apart webs of broken dreams. But this is the Blessed Emperor's will. This is why you were bound to him. Every blurred detail, every fractured abstract image forms part of a message, a notice, a purpose. And it's your duty to wrench that purpose from the substance of thoughts and visions, no matter the discomfort and strain, no matter how many whispers or how much bellowing laughter digs into your mind as a result. And so, this life, it can pull you under. The burden takes its toll. Many of your kind burn out, quite literally. Many others are swallowed whole by madness, their thoughts eroded to dust, minds left hollow and scorched by visions too complex, too horrific to withstand. They have seen things that should never have existed, not even in dreams. Things no being should ever see. Some opened their minds too wide, strained or strayed too far, or glimpsed wicked premonitions that clawed at the fragile edges of their sanity. But you? Well, you are far more prone to simple forgetfulness. You find that you disassociate, you drift, you lose yourself in the mind and forget where and when you are. You forget the cold metal bindings that hold you in place, the blindfold pulled tight over where your eyes once were, the darkness that surrounds the choir, the sound of groans, gasps, and screams, the sound of sweat or blood dripping onto metal deck plating. You forget the endless hours spent within the chamber, the dry, cracked pain in your throat from chanting words and prayers that are both yours and not yours, half formed and half forgotten. You forget that your life ever had meaning outside of the visions, that there was ever a time when you were free from the weight of dreams you never asked for, never wished to see. But sometimes you do remember that with this burden, this toil, comes a rare privilege. In those fleeting moments when you are, in fact, permitted to leave the chamber, to rest and to recover, to step into open corridors, to breathe scrubbed air, to stretch and move your limbs, to eat, drink, and speak plainly, to feel, if briefly, the weight of life as it should be, these are few and far between. In such moments, you are respected. You are needed. Critical, even. Every soul aboard this station knows it, from the lowliest hull rat to the most senior officer. They understand, however dimly, that without you and your kind, the void would swallow them whole. Out here, they'd die forgotten, left to starve and to regress. Without your kind, humanity would be adrift, severed from itself, and creating such times that have not been seen since the depths of old night. Yet, you are also feared, held at arm's length by those who see your empty sockets and feel the wrongness of your presence. They see in you a force that they can't quite comprehend, a wielder of powers and potential that unsettle them, something they'd rather keep at a safe distance or forget altogether. So yes, your quarters may appear luxurious compared to those of the common crew, fitted with comforts rarely found on these cold void ships and stations. There is entertainment enough, true, wine and food, though flavourless to you, of course, dances, men and women aplenty. No expense is denied to your kind, not out here. But, in truth, this luxury is both payment and prison. Payment for the burdens you bear, the terrible weight of knowledge and responsibility that you shoulder. But it's also confinement, a means of keeping you apart, shielding the baselines from the discomfort that your presence brings. Privilege, yes, but one that isolates as much as it... Your mind snaps back to the present, jolted by the groans of pain and the clinking of chains that herald the message. It crashes into your mind, vivid and immediate, more intense than anything you've felt in what must be weeks. You gasp, straightening as your tattooed hands clench into white-knuckled fists as the rest of the choir mirrors you. Images flood your mind, a towering golden cathedral swallowed by darkness, a stormy sky where distant lights flicker and fade, scrolls and tomes open before you, only to be filled with empty pages, drops of burning fire rain down from the sky before blackening and crumbling to ash, massive cauldrons and vats bubble as shadowed faces appear from within, mouths open in silent screams. Blood trickles from your nose, your ears, your body fights against the weight and impact of the vision. But then it fades. It leaves an odd, fleeting calm as the hint of a smile plays at your lips. Ah, this is an easy one. Helatine Tertius has run out of candle wax again. Mutants, freaks, pariahs, outcasts. These are the words that come to mind when one hears of psykers in the Imperium. There are other words too, of course, witch, deviant, soul-blighted, labels that accurately capture the masses' deep-rooted disdain for such beings. To most, psykers are an unwelcome anomaly, a dangerous offshot corruption of humanity. Figures that are best kept apart or at a distance, to be watched carefully with caution and to never be trusted. You see, most baseline humans naturally recoil from psykers. They are disturbed and discomforted by the raw, unsettling aura that surrounds and follows them. Most citizens will not be educated enough to know exactly what psykers are, how they work, or how to identify them, but they still feel the wrongness, the unnatural presence about them that defies reason. This is partly why young, unidentified psykers are often pushed to the margins of society, becoming outcasts, hermits, seers, or healers, practicing questionable trades on the outskirts of civilization for as long as they can remain hidden from the planetary authorities or the Inquisition's eyes. In their raw, unsanctioned state, they are simply ill-suited to life among baseline humans. And to make matters worse, this segregation and isolation serves to stoke the public's fears and suspicions, deepening stereotypes and often worsening the psyker's own mental state, driving them to become even more increasingly eccentric, volatile, or reclusive than they already would have been. Yet, for all of the contempt, for all of the curses and the watchful scrutiny, psykers still remain one of the Imperium's most critical assets, bound to roles and responsibilities that are absolutely vital to humanity's continued survival. They are barely contained forces of nature, tools that keep the Imperium connected across impossible distances, that feed the Golden Throne and the Astronomicon. Beings brimming with dangerous potential, capable of using the powers of the warp to turn the tide of any battle. And still, they walk a dangerous path, sanctioned one day and hunted the next, a force held close and desperately needed, but still forever monitored and distrusted, scrutinized for the faintest sign of impurity, watched by inquisitors, handlers, and countless others who would execute them in an instant if they had any suspicion at all that they were losing control. And understandably so. There is a quote from the now censored text Admonitions on the Duties of the Witchfinder that I have always been quite fond of, and which I believe summarizes this whole dynamic quite nicely. Where you see the pure and strong, there too will you find the impure and weak. Where you find but one worthy of life, you will also find a million twisted, deformed monstrosities for whom death by your hand is a mercy. Therefore, look first for the mutant, for he may never hide his sin from you, and in his midst there will be revealed to you that which you seek. But be ever vigilant, for even should you find one with the gift, only 1 in 1,000 psykers will be strong enough to resist the perils of the Imperium and be allowed to live. From the psyker's perspective, however, life is a balancing act of simple endurance, restraint, and theatre. Discipline is key. Concentration too. The warpfare presses against their minds, whispers from within its depths are forever present, and promises of power are all too often too incredible and too tempting to ignore. But a single lapse, a single misstep or stray thought, this is all that it would take to let the warp's tendrils worm their way in, turning what was a servant of the Imperium into a monstrous abomination and a threat to all. So they must restrain themselves, limit their power, and quiet the voices that echo in their minds. For the psyker, the greatest enemy is rarely the Xenos or the heretic, but far more often their own minds, or the watchful, wary eyes of those who monitor them. Every thought, every flicker of emotion must therefore be guarded so as to not spiral out of control or give away a sign that they are anything but the model of restraint and control. But what do they do? We know that they're important, that they're watched closely, and that they're powerful. We know that they're paranoid, volatile, and live lives that are nothing short of complicated. But what does life actually look like for the average psyker? Is it all really as bad as it seems? Yes, their lives are pretty grim. But that doesn't mean that there's no variety in their existence. No, in fact, there are few career paths open to them. Well, maybe open is a stretch. It's more like there are a handful of roles that they can be forced into. Not all psykers are doing the same thing, after all. So let's start from the beginning. From the moment of birth, those tainted with or suspected of having latent psychic potential are scrutinized, marked on hidden ledgers, and gossiped about behind closed doors. Across many worlds and sectors, planetary authorities take it even further and track young psykers as they would wild beasts. They follow their every move, tracking them, waiting until the time is right, likely when their powers begin to manifest openly, before closing in. They are then seized and locked away, young and old alike, sent into cold holding centers or crude internment camps, and placed under watchful guard. It's not uncommon for such souls to live in these circumstances for decades, stripped of freedom, not for any crime committed, but for the dangerous power that stirs within them, whether known or not. Their only crime is the threat their minds may one day unleash. And so, they wait for the arrival of the Black Fleet. When the black ships do ultimately arrive in orbit to collect the Emperor's due, this psyker tithe is delivered under heavy guard. Often bound at wrists and ankles, the captives are dragged forth to board with no regard for age, nobility, or station. Under the penetrating gaze of the Silent Sisterhood and perhaps an Inquisitor or two, each psyker is stripped of any dignity that they may have clung to, herded like one might herd livestock. The stronger are contained within null cells made of psychically resistant material and surrounded by powerful wards of containment that suppresses their powers and saps their strength. While the rest, the ignorant and the confused, the weak and the frightened, they are crammed into cavernous psychically shielded holds and cargo bays. And so deep within the black ships, they wait once more, clinging to what remains of their sanity, the only thing they still really own, as days bleed into weeks and weeks into months. For many, the mind begins to fracture under the strain, their anxiety, fear, and despair pressing outward like a physical force, amplified by the collective emotion radiating from those around them. Trapped within walls designed to absorb and reflect their psychic resonance, they nourish themselves with food and water that is laced with sedatives, their minds and souls numbed further by the empty presence of the patrolling sisters. Sleep is made almost impossible by mounted speakers that blare random discordant noises and fractured off-pitch music loudly at irregular intervals, denying the captive psykers any chance to rest, think, or concentrate. And layered over all of this is the constant droning signal of the ship's occluding sphere, a form of mental static that is forced into the minds of every psyker on board, designed to drown out conscious thought and to smother any coherent sense of self. Put simply, if you find yourself captive aboard a black ship, sit and accept your fate with all the dignity that remains to you. Your life is no longer your own. It belongs to the Imperium now. For those whose minds survive such a journey, a final selection awaits on Terra where their fates will be decided. For many, probably most, the broken, those whose minds and or bodies gave out along the journey, a lesser end is in store. They are to become little more than psychic kindling, living psychic fuel to be burned away in the Holy Emperor's golden throne to sustain him in his most holy works. Few others, those who are in fact too broken or too weak, whether in mind or body, even for such a noble end, these are claimed by the priests of Mars, their flesh to be used and repurposed to become servitors and servo skulls so that they may further serve the Imperium, willing or not. And for the rest, for the sane, the controlled, the stable, these will be scrutinized on their arrival by the most wise and ancient masters of Terra's astrotelepathica. Each is mind scanned, sorted, graded, assessed for the talent, strength, and resilience needed to endure the demanding training and trials that await those who are successful. Only a small number are chosen, separated from the others, stripped of name and identity, heads shaved and bodies bare, to walk barefoot to the glorious halls of the Scholastia Psykana. But for those who fail to meet the standards of the Order, those found lacking, well, their fate is simpler. Just more fuel for the all-consuming fires of the Blessed Emperor's golden throne. Those who are chosen, those found worthy, those who survive the gauntlet of trials, tests, and evaluations, well, they blossom. They are tested, and tested again. They learn of the warp and the beings within, and of how it shifts and how it breathes. They learn to harness their powers, to understand how to control them as best they can. They are shaped into the soul seers and the dream scries that form the Imperium's psychic communications network, and in other cases, they are summoned to the Forbidden Fortress, joining the 10,000 psykers whose strength fuels the Great Beacon, the Astronomicon, to guide humanity through the chaos of the warp. Roughly 1 in 10 million might be sent to the front lines as a sanctioned psyker to cut down the enemies of the Imperium on the field. Even fewer, around 1 in 100 million, may be selected to ascend as an Astartes librarian, while the rarest of all, somewhere around 1 in a billion, may be deemed worthy of serving as an inquisitor themselves or as some other high-ranking Imperial official. But for the majority of psykers, or individuals identified as such, they will in fact die aboard the black ships on their journey to Terra, or they will become little more than living batteries to be sucked dry in the Emperor's golden throne by the 1,000. To put it simply, most psykers face a painfully short life, with death arriving early and horribly. It's a bit boring, really, not very glamorous in the grand scheme of things. But those who do make it through, however, will become astropaths, sanctioned psykers, librarians. Many will die in the brutal training and trials that are required, but the strongest will make it through and live on to serve and to train the next generation of their kind. We've already touched on what life is like for astropaths at the start of the video, but in essence, they are the Imperium's transmission conduits, the living psychic network keeping its million worlds and systems connected across the galaxy. Their value is undeniable, and therefore it should come as no surprise that the overwhelming majority, by some accounts over 90% of candidates deemed suitable by the Astrotelepathica, are inducted as astropaths to serve in this capacity, making the experience of an astropath very much the experience of the average psyker in the Imperium. To embrace the life of an astropath is to dwell in a world of dreams and visions, forever blind to the material world, quite literally, as their sight, smell, taste, and often even their hearing are seared away in the ritual of soul binding with the Emperor. Gathered 100 at a time, they are granted a rare audience with him, enduring hours of painful transformation wherein an incredibly small fragment of the Emperor's power touches their minds, reshaping and fortifying them against the warp and binding them into his grand psychic web. The process leaves those who survive forever changed, bound by soul to the Emperor, their physical senses burned away, but their metaphysical powers sharpened and strengthened. Once soul-bound and assigned to their duties, the lives of astropaths vary widely. Given their key function, one might assume that they would be met with respect and dignity everywhere they go. After all, the Imperium's very coherent existence depends upon their capabilities. Without astropaths, entire worlds and systems would be isolated and cut off. So yes, their importance sometimes grants them a measure of respect. and in some cases, high-ranking Imperial officials or nobility will respect them openly. They may even be housed in comfortable, even luxurious quarters where space and logistics allow. Such lucky astropaths may experience brief respites from the demands of their duties, able to savor moments of relative peace away from the darkness and intensity of the relay chambers. But, sadly, as with most things in the Imperium, such benefits are often the exception. Even these privileged few are kept on a short leash, more like prized tools than anything else. Though their surroundings may be more comfortable, they still remain segregated from broader society, their only true intimacy coming from the touch of other minds within the choir. The Imperium's cultural mistrust of psykers is deeply ingrained, and even astropaths, though critical to its infrastructure and whose loyalty is rarely questioned, are not exempt. Just by living and performing their function, they remain constant reminders of their otherness, with restricted movement and limited freedoms. It's not uncommon to find astropaths subjected to conditions that verge on slavery or servitorization. Some are permanently fused to their relay chambers like living machinery, intravenously fed and hydrated, left to decipher and transmit messages until they inevitably burn out in their restraints. Like so many tools in the Imperium, astropaths are valued only as long as they are functional. Once broken, they are repurposed or unceremoniously replaced, dragged from smoking thrones while the last wisps of warp essence seep from their lips and eye sockets. The daily life of an astropath, then, is simple to explain. Their waking moments and their dreams are both haunted by visions. They are deprived of their physical senses and left to interpret the universe through the lens of their mind's eye. While some may still experience limited physical and carnal pleasures, and may have the option to explore recreational activities, many are still stationed on Imperial Navy vessels or remote stations, limited in their options, cut off from broader society, and confined to Imperial microcosms or massive facilities restricted to the public. No leisurely strolls to the local recaf shop, and no joyrides in gravcars through the city skyways. Astropaths instead spend their time unraveling an endless torrent of visions, clinging to sanity as they sift through fragments of madness. They're expected to withstand the assault of psychic stimuli, to keep their minds intact as long as possible. But, in time, they all burn out. It's inevitable. But believe it or not, there is a silver lining to all this, so don't worry too much. Yes, their minds may shatter and break, and their brain may melt and drip out their nose as warp energy seeps from their smouldering eye sockets. But to a psyker, this is no great tragedy. In fact, it's quite the opposite. As is described in the Hollow Mountain, they, psykers, would come to believe in time that annihilation in his service was the highest calling any mortal human could ever hope for. They would dream of it, they would long for it, and when the call finally came, they already knew the words they would sing. Endlessly, rapturously, as their eyelids burned away and their skin began to crisp. So you see, it's not all that bad, right? It's sort of a win-win situation when you really think about it. Anyway, thanks for watching. Dystopian Chimp, out.